Welcome to a study of the Gospel of Matthew, Part 2, Lesson 18. The Messianic King prepares for his coronation. This is Matthew 22, 41 through 23, 39. Whose son is the Christ? Matthew 22, 41 through 46. This is part of that day of controversy when the different religious groups tried to show that Jesus was not what he claimed to be. They tried to humiliate him in the presence of the people. This pericope could be included in the previous lesson, but it would have made a lesson far too long, and I rather arbitrarily divided it and put it here. However, that lesson was much longer than I like lessons to be, so I decided to place it first and here place this one. Matthew intends his readers to read the text as Jesus' declaration of total victory in the honor-shame debates. Jesus was the champion by a knockout every time. The closing sentence shows how completely successful he was. Second pericope, the seven woes, Matthew 23, verses 1 through 39. Remember, the word woe goes back to the time when Joshua puts the people on two different hillsides and tells them the rewards, the benefits of keeping the law, and the bad things that will happen. Woe simply means a bad thing. And the subject of both bless and woe in the Bible, both Old and New Testament, is God. God does punish people in this life. Now, that doesn't mean every time we suffer we have committed some specific sin. Some suffering comes simply because we live as human beings in a world corrupted by sin. And sin and death is a natural result of that. But God chooses, reserves the right to choose, and does choose to send punishment not only to groups, but to specific people. Now, I want to be careful when I say God blesses individuals and God sends bad things, because so we human beings, with our mixed sense of doing right and wrong, can be either too easy on ourselves and say, like the Pharisee and the publican, the Pharisee said, look how good I am. Or we can be worse than the publican and say, there's no hope for me. Neither one is true, but both are possible. And it requires a sensitive heart and a prayerful self-investigation. So don't be either too easy on yourself or too hard on yourself. In this chapter, Matthew closes his narrative of Jesus' public teaching with Jesus pronouncing 7 woes upon the Jewish leaders. Now here, we have no problem. We know that God sends these bad things to these specific people because Matthew says that's what he does. This is a fitting ending of that narrative, which had opened with the Beatitudes. See, it's almost like Joshua's blessings and curses, or blessings and woes, after on the mountain sides. Matthew opens with blessings, and he closes Jesus' public teaching with curses of the religious leaders. As I told you in our study of the Sermon on the Mount, the Jews always attributed the blessings as coming from God. Likewise, they also always attributed the woes as coming upon God, upon those Jews who were unfaithful to the covenant. And opening with blessings on those who are faithful to the covenant, their covenant responsibilities, and closing with those woes upon those who are unfaithful to their covenant responsibility, Matthew intends for his readers to remember that Old Testament event and to see that Jesus is a new king, a new leader of the people. The core of Jesus' criticism of the Jewish religious leaders was that while they did a good job of teaching the content of the law, they failed miserably in keeping that content in their daily lives, and failed even more miserably in helping the ordinary people live up to their covenant responsibility. This occurred because in their daily lives, they were always seeking the approval of their fellow Jews and not seeking God's approval. In addition, they made it difficult for the Jews to keep the law by hedging the law with minute and legalistic traditional rules. At the same time, they offered the average Jew no help in interpreting and applying the law to their lives. In this rather long pericope, Matthew summarizes Jesus' castigation of the Jewish religious leaders. Thus, the summary brings to a fitting end Jesus' constant opposition to their failures. Many modern readers think that Jesus' language was very harsh. In this, they are correct. However, such readers need to realize that his language is far less harsh than was the judgment which God himself sent upon the Jewish nation in the Roman-Jewish War of 66 to 70 AD. Matthew closes his summary, the Jewish religious leaders, by foreshadowing that judgment and a prediction of Jesus' impending death. He intends for his readers to see a cause and effect relationship between the two events. The implication of the closing paragraph is that Jesus' death would mark the end of a special covenant relationship between God and the Jews. Henceforth, they would be judged as all people would be, and that judgment would be based on their relationship with Jesus. Since this is such an important section, I'd like to close by talking about making the teaching of this section your own. The central theme of this lesson is the final failure of the Jewish people to discharge their covenant responsibility. Their responsibility was to cause the name of God to be honored among the Gentiles. This is a biblical teaching that is often overlooked by the followers of Jesus today. Far too often, the emphasis by church leaders and members is on living in such a way that they please their fellow believers. If a preacher wants to bring a congregation in line, he holds up either a sin, or sometimes, God forbid, an individual, and humiliates them by saying, look, you're not living up to what the church expects you. I'd like to kindly draw attention to the fact that it's not what the church expects that is the guideline of our behavior. It's what pleases God. Now, I'm not saying that non-believers should decide what is morally, ethically, or theologically correct. Only that how we live should cause non-believers to honor the name of God whom we serve. Some examples of the behavior that should not occur in the lives of believers today are such things as harsh and condemnatory language used against unbelievers. If angels did not bring railing accusations against Satan, how dare we as believers today bring blasphemous accusations against unbelievers in the world? It is just not congruent with the nature and character of Jesus' kingdom. There's no room for racial bigotry, making judgments on the basis of race or class or political party. That, since we're engaged in the 2016 political race right now, that's one that believers need to really take to heart. We should not try in the church either to please or displease any political party or political ideology. Hatred toward any other group of human beings. Rather than closing on a negative note, I think I will stop there, although I could go on quite a long time. Seeking to please the prejudices of their fellow Jews on the part of the Jewish religious leaders was condemned by Jesus then, and I'm sure that he will condemn us for analogous faults today. All of this means that to make the teaching of this lesson ours, we need to start with a prayerful self-examination of our life in the light of what I have said above. When you discover, or when we discover, an aspect of our lives that causes the name of our God not to be honored by unbelievers, we must change that action. We need to repeat it periodically through our lives. You need to note that the basis of the judgment pictured in Matthew 25 is the works of serving others. Correct doctrine was not even mentioned. Thank you and good day.